Thank you for joining. It's really nice to see so many people today, in spite of the bad weather. It's great to see the solidarity and support. So today's event is brought to you by two organizations. The first one is the Boston South Asian Coalition. So I'll tell a little bit about both organizations, and then we can start with the program. So Boston South Asian Coalition is an intergenerational South Asian-led organizing collective formed in 2017, fighting for economic and environmental justice, gender and racial equity, an end to caste discrimination, and human rights for all. Boston South Asian Coalition works with grassroots organizations across the world to impact anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist change within the subcontinent and across the diaspora. The other organization is the Indian American Muslim Council, which is the largest US-based advocacy organization of Indian American Muslims. It was registered in Washington, D.C. in 2002 as a tax-exempt nonprofit. It has chapters across the country with thousands of members. So, the topic for today basically is the documentary that was released by BBC very recently, about a month back. On the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's role in enabling religious violence and violent pogroms in India. So this documentary is in two parts. The first part of the documentary focuses on the violent pogroms, especially of the Gujarat. Actually, it's very specific to Gujarat, of the Gujarat pogrom in 2002, when he was the Chief Minister of the state of Gujarat. In fact, this week we are observing the 25th anniversary of the Godhra carnage that happened in Gujarat. The second part of this documentary focuses on the violence and religious polarization enabled by Narendra Modi and the ruling party of India after he became the Prime Minister of India. The government of India, under the Prime Ministership of Modi, has banned this documentary in India using the government's emergency powers. So the plan for today is we are not going to show the entire documentary. The documentary is 2 hours long, 1 hour long. The first part and the second part is also 1 hour long. So that's not the plan. The documentary has been showed many times in the Boston area by different groups, different student groups. Our focus is to talk more about it, to have like a panel discussion. So what we're going to do is we're just going to show about 10 minutes worth of clips from the documentary for you to just get the context. And then after that we're going to relate it to the larger agendas of the ruling class behind such religious violence. I will play the clips, following which we will have some talks and Q&A session. Our speakers for today will be Arif, who is going to speak about the political economy of religious violence in India, covering religious pogroms and caste atrocities, and why this is always done by the ruling class in India to suit their needs. Somnath and Upasna are going to talk about pogroms and people's resistance. In their talk, they will cover the highly controversial Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens of India, along with other related topics like othering of certain sections of the population of India and the struggles of indigenous people. And finally, Pratyush will talk about crony capitalism and the plunder of resources in India by the ruling class and their corporate allies. So, are you ready? We get started? So I'll play the first clip, first series of clips, and that is about the Godhra incident. I'll tell just a little bit about it, what happened. So exactly 21 years back, on the morning of 27th February 2002, 59 Hindu pilgrims were killed in a fire inside the Sabarmati Express near Godhra railway station in Gujarat. The cause of the fire remains disputed. The aftermath of this was indiscriminate violence, cutting and burning of human beings, brutal rapes, and gruesome human rights abuses. Muslims were the primary targets, and there was little or no intervention by authorities to stop this violence. So I'm going to play the clips from the first part.
In some areas, the brief and angered year have already erupted into violence. That's alarming news in a state where racial hatred is deeply ingrained. Jill McGivering, BBC News, Godhra, Gujarat. On the worst day of the violence, when murder and looting were taking place all across the city, we saw policemen just standing by, watching what was happening, but doing nothing to try to stop it.
As questions grew around Mr. Modi's actions, attention turned to his past.
RSS stands for Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, the Association of Indian Volunteers.
The RSS is a political organization. It believes that this is a country of the Hindus.
When a senior police officer arrived at the house that evening, the victims' corpses were still smouldering.
Their allegation that police could have done more in Ahmedabad today.
There's always scope for improvement, I concede. There's always scope for improvement. I'm sure we could have done better, but I think I would take it as my inadequacy, if that is to be said.
We described it as a pogrom, a deliberate and politically driven effort targeted at the Muslim community. The violence was widely reported to have been organised by an extremist Hindu nationalist group, the VHP, who have a relationship with the RSS.
The VHP and its allies could not have inflicted so much damage without the climate of impunity created by the state government. Narendra Modi is directly responsible. The report contained an extraordinary claim. Reliable contacts have told us Narendra Modi met senior police officers on the 27th of February and ordered them not to intervene in the rioting. Police contacts deny this meeting happened. The European Union carried out an investigation at around the same time. It reportedly found that ministers took active part in violence, and senior police officers were instructed not to intervene in the rioting.
Someone say it is a human right or is it general international
Please
interest?
don't try to preach us the human rights. We know what human rights are. You Britishers should not preach us human rights.
When you look back over the last month, you've been the leader of this state through a very difficult period. Do you think there's anything that you should have done differently?
Yes, one area where I was very, very big, and that was how to handle the media.
A new repertoire had taken shape. You polarize, you vote, and you get the majority supporting you.
In 2007, a reporter went undercover in Gujarat to investigate what had happened during the violence. Posing as a Hindu extremist, he secretly filmed one of the killers boasting about the role he had played. Babu Bajrangi was accused of leading a mob that killed around 100 people. Mr. Bajrangi made an extraordinary claim about Narendra Modi. He said that when he was arrested for murder, several months after the massacre, Mr. Modi helped him get bail by changing the judge. The police arrested Mr. Sri Kumar and a high-profile human rights worker who helped Mrs. Jaffrey bring the case. Sanjeev Bhatt, already in prison, was named in the police complaint too. All three are accused of fabricating evidence. 20 years on, the Gujarat violence remains controversial.
None of the people arrested were sources for our report, and the findings of our investigation still stand. 2,000 people were murdered in Gujarat in 2002, in a campaign of violence that was clearly well organised. That remains a fact. Now Mr. Modi is in power, it seems to me that history is being rewritten.
That's what I have for the first part. So, just a few clarifying points. Because these are just snippets, so a lot of these do not flow as, very nicely or clearly, right? So the last three names that were said, Sanjeev Bhatt, Sri Kumar, and human rights activists. So these are people who actually kind of testified in cases against Modi. And they were then incarcerated, slapped, false charges against them, and put in jail. One thing I did want to mention was the case of Bilkis Bano. My personal thing is human rights and humanity, so I like to talk about it. So Bilkis Bano was a 21-year-old married and expecting woman who had fled the violence with her family a couple of days after the Godhra incident. So she and her family, with some others, took refuge in a village. They were attacked by 30 men armed with swords and sickles and rods and whatnot. Bilkis Bano and her mother and 3 other women were gang raped. Bilkis Bano's 3-year-old daughter was taken and thrown on rocks, and her head was smashed. And all this was done in front of Bilkis Bano. Bilkis and her husband survived, but most of the others perished. 11 men were convicted for the rapes and murders, and were later convicted, basically, not at that time. After that, they were convicted and they were serving life imprisonment. Recently, last year, on the 75th Independence Day anniversary of India, those 11 men were released by the Gujarat government with the nod of approval of the BJP-ruled government of Modi. In fact, the Gujarat government is also ruled by the same party. And they were released on humanitarian grounds because they were serving 18 years already in prison, and one of them had put in a petition. So they were released on humanitarian grounds, so to say. And as soon as they were released from prison, they were hailed as some demigods, The family members came, and not just the family members, even members of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, the VHP that was talked about in the documentary. They are also allied with the ruling party of India. So they came, they garlanded these 11 men, their feet were touched, they were just treated like, gods or something. And then later a BJP leader hailed them as Brahmin men of high character and morals. So this is the state of India right now, under this regime. And my only comment here is, if these rapists and gruesome killers are the best of men in India right now, imagine how the not so good ones would be. Something to think about. So I will now pass it on to our first official speaker of the day, Arif, please.
So thank you very much, Saeed. And pardon me in advance because I have too much to cover and I have to speak fast. And second thing is also I'm going to complicate the issues a little bit, going beyond this binary of Hindu-Muslim which we hear a lot in India. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to trace the chronology of interreligious violence in India, going back to middle of 19th century, and then I'm only covering like major incidents which made national news kind of. Otherwise, there are thousands and thousands of other incidents which don't make to national news. It's going on even as we speak. So yeah, there's a trigger warning that there are mentions of sexual and physical violence, torture, suicide, and death. So just say brace for that. So I'll start with the first kind of account of major interreligious violence we have is actually from Godhra, the same place which Saeed was talking about. Train burning took place, and that and the Gujarat program. It's from 1854. We don't have a lot of details, but it mostly looks like there was a business dispute between a strong group of Muslim businessmen and non-Muslim businessmen, mostly Gujarati Panyas, and that led to fighting between two sides, and there were a few hundred casualties. Jumping like almost 40 years, Bombay of August 1893. So as people who know South Asian history, this was an important period because this is now happening after 1858 and 64, when the British Crown has taken direct control of the Indian territories. Before that, it was controlled by the East India Company, and in very British fashion, they had immediately embarked on a project to divide the Indian society so that they can control it better. And the identities they decided upon was a Hindu identity and a Muslim identity. So there is whole exercise of strengthening this identity and how to solidify this identity. And they were finding different ways how to do it. And one thing we found was we can use the cow. So a number of Gau Rakshak Mandals or cow protection societies came up especially in Western India, Maharashtra and Gujarat. So there was a rumor that in a mosque in Bombay, the Jama Masjid, the main mosque in Bombay, Muslims have slaughtered a cow, and then the stone pelting started after Friday prayers, and the Muslims retaliated, and the usual story happened. About 100 people were killed, 800 injured. Now, there was a trend. It was done after cities, small town after town, but one major difference is that it almost always stayed in urban areas. Between 1921 and 1940, so First World War has ended. The British are in a much weaker position. They are realizing slowly the global equations are changing, that they need to go and they need to protect their interests. So this is the time we see all these sectarian groups are propped up by the British government in India, the British Crown in India. We see Muslim League coming up, which was totally supported by the British. We see RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, coming up, totally supported by both these groups. Actually pledged their allegiance to the Crown and have been, at least initially, away from the freedom struggle. I mean, RSS, even after independence, Muslim League got very much weaker because most of its leadership had migrated to Pakistan. So that period was pretty bad. Major violence like Calcutta and Muharram in 1926, leaving 28 dead, and of course, then we come to partition, the 46 to 48 period, the bloodiest period the world has ever seen. People just getting killed like anything. All over Punjab, the estimates range from 2 million to 10 million people died. Those are estimates. The various citizen groups have worked on it, and whereas the official figure says that about 1 million people died. And of course, there is no account of rapes and other such incidents. Then, of course, in 1948, the annexation of Hyderabad, which by the Indian Union, which was done in complete contravention of the cabinet plan. The cabinet plan 1946 was the plan through which the partition of India took place, and it gave the princely states the right to decide whether they want to be independent or merge with Pakistan or India. The Nizam of Hyderabad, I mean, not a nice guy, he was pretty bad in his own right, but as per the cabinet plan, he had the right and they chose to remain independent. 1948, Indian army invaded Hyderabad, and it's called police action because as per international law, if you don't declare war, you cannot call it war. So it's army action, but undeclared, so you call it police action. Estimates are from 100,000 to 200,000 people were killed, mostly Muslims. And of course, RSS was also pretty influential in that. So that was another. 1948 to 1960 was kind of a quiet period for two reasons. One was in 1948, 30th January, Gandhi was assassinated by an RSS member, which RSS claims was an ex-member, Nathuram Godse. So, and after that, there was a brief ban on RSS, and there was some incidents of violence against Brahmins, especially Chitpavan Brahmins, where the Godse came from in Pune and Nagpur area. So they were lying low. The second thing happened that the right-wing kind of leader within the Congress infrastructure, Congress system, Vallabhbhai Patel, who was generally the protector and enabler of right-wing people, he died, he passed away in 50. And Nehru, because of his proximity to Gandhi, was still very angry with these folks, RSS folks and other Hindu right-wing folks, so they kind of laid pretty low for that period. That quiet period ended in 1961 when another major flare happened in Jabalpur, which is in the state of Madhya Pradesh, which is in central India. And but was very interesting, the character had now changed because most of the Muslim right-wing organization leadership had already moved to Pakistan. And along with them, most of the Muslim elite, the academicians, the bureaucrats, the top elite leaders, top police officials, they had already moved to Pakistan. So Muslims in general were in a much weaker state anyways, in general. But some towns, some cities still had major Muslim interest, business interest. And that's the next target of communal violence with the backing of the state, especially by the Bania community. So the Baniyas started organizing these riots to take control of Muslim businesses and also to weaken them economically. Jabalpur was the first in that line. There was a big beedi industry. Beedi is like hand-rolled cigarettes. In like Tenduli, if you add some cheap tobacco, it's very popular among poor people even today. So most of that business in Jabalpur was controlled by Muslim businessmen, and the Marwadis wanted to take control of that, and that kind of a riot was engineered for that purpose, and 20 people died, and it was very successful from that business perspective. Then we come to 1969, again Ahmedabad riots, one of the deadliest riots, 1,000 dead, but interestingly, it did not have a direct Hindu-Muslim angle to it. It was actually prompted by infighting within Congress party. So Congress party was split in 1969, as we know, and to Indian National Congress as we know it. And there was a Congress O, which was formed by Morarji Desai and other people, which was called Congress Organization, and then other group was called Congress R, or Congress Requisition, led by Indira Gandhi. The Gujarat Chief Minister at that time was from the Congress O faction, the breakaway Congress, and Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister. So that riot was actually engineered to undermine the Chief Minister and eventually on that basis to suspend the government. So as per Indian Constitution, through Article 356, the central government can kind of suspend a government, state government, saying that they're not functioning well and they're not carrying out their duties. So that was done, but in those riots again, more than 1,000 people died. So that was like a political infighting within Congress. And of course, there are other reasons I'll come to a little bit. There was business reason as well because, and in the sense that the grounding was provided by business reason because that's Ahmedabad is a textile mill area. At least used to be a textile mill area. And then again, there was business competition between various communities and political parties also took advantage of that. 1970 major riot in Bhiwandi. Bhiwandi is a town close to Bombay, and in 1984, again, it's a center of power loom, one of the biggest centers of power loom in India. And again, this business rivalry between Banias and established Muslim businessmen led to, and there have been incidents, I mean, as I said earlier, what I've been talking about are major incidents which made national news, big news. Otherwise, there are like two people dying somewhere in communal violence. It does not really make national news in India. And then coming to Jamshedpur and Aligarh. Now, Jamshedpur is very interesting because Jamshedpur is a company town. And basically the town is run by Tata company. Tatas are major investors from India, and the labor union used to be very strong. So after 70s, a whole slew of measures were started by Tatas and also in cahoots with the government to weaken these unions. And to weaken these unions, one of the prongs they used was break the unions break the labor along the religious lines. So for that, there were major riots were engineered in Jamshedpur. Aligarh was also a big in 1979. Now Aligarh again is a business center. Now it is all made by machines, but for a very long time, very good quality locks were made by these craftsmen by hand. And Aligarh is in Uttar Pradesh, northern state in India, very close to Delhi. Most of the lock making industry was controlled by Muslim businessmen and Muslim traders. So there was again an attack to destroy their businesses and take that business away, and very successful that has been. Coming to 1983, it's Nelli pogrom. Nelli is in Assam, in northeast India, and there are ethnic tension going on, and there are issues around migration. I think Somnath and Upasana are going to talk about it later. So the upper caste Hindus mobilized the tribals to carry out killings on these landless Muslim peasants, basically. And the various estimates are from 2,000 to 10,000 dead. And the government complicity was such that it's been almost 40 years. Yeah, there was a commission established called Tiwari Commission. They submitted the report in 1984. This is 2023. That report is still classified. That we don't know what really happened. Coming to Sikh pogrom in 1984. So it's just not Hindu Muslim. I mean, or just not about Muslims. Sikh pogroms in 1984, mostly in Delhi, but almost all urban centers in North India. I mean, the estimates range from 3,000 to 8,000 Sikhs, mostly Sikhs dead. And just a brief history I'll try. I mean, the origins of that conflict was in Punjab politics. The Punjab politics, there is a regional party, Akali Dal, which is a kind of quasi-religious party, has been very strong. And Indira Gandhi-led Congress party had been trying to make inroads into Punjab for a very long time. So what she did, she propped up an even more radical, almost crazy guy who became like a saint and promoted by the media and promoted by the government, called Sant Bhindranwale. He was like anointed as sant by the government itself. And then on the pretext of countering Sant Bhindranwale and his organization, the Indian army invaded one of the holiest holiest sites of Sikhism, the Golden Temple in Amritsar, called Darbar Sahib as well. In retaliation of that attack, Sikhs were agitated all over India, and two of Indira Gandhi's Sikh bodyguards killed her on 31st October 1984. They killed her in the same evening. Large-scale killing of Sikhs started first in Delhi, and then it spread over all the towns. And it was so bad at that time, the President of India was a Sikh, Gyani Jail Singh. He called, then when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, Congress party appointed or anointed her son, Rajiv Gandhi, as the next Prime Minister. And he took over same, so there was no break in power. He took over same evening, and the President is calling. I mean, the then press secretary of the President, Tarlochan Singh, is on record saying that when Jail Singh called the Prime Minister to bring in the army to control the mobs because police was ineffective, and the Home Minister, they didn't even take his call. So, I mean, I'm just talking about how complicit the state power is. I mean, that level of violence is just not possible in India without the state complicity, especially because the state structure in India and the institutions remain extremely, not extremely, colonial in nature. They're not poor people, pro people in general. They are very adept and very capable of cracking down on people, whatever the state decides on. So this kind of violence is just not possible. Then 1985 Gujarat riots. This is again very interesting aspect going beyond Hindu and Muslim. So what happened basically in 1985 in Gujarat, that the then Chief Minister Solanki, accepted the report of Backward Classes Commission and gave extra percentage of affirmative action to backward classes in jobs and in education institution, what has been given so far on top of that. In protest of that, the upper caste youth, basically Brahmins and the Banyas and some Kshatriyas, started obstructing traffic, they started attacking government buildings and boycotting colleges and stuff like that. And there was some level of violence that started. But to counter these anti-reservation people, the lower caste people who were getting this reservation now, or affirmative action now, they come onto the streets and started attacking the anti-reservation people. And that flared up pretty quickly, because if you look at the composition, the upper caste in India is anywhere between 13 to 17, 18%, whereas the backward classes we are talking about, they are like 65, 70%. So there is no math. So large scale violence erupted between pro and anti-reservation people. Of course, the pro-reservation people were getting their much number. They started attacking the upper caste businesses, upper caste homes. Then the administration quickly stepped in and engendered Hindu-Muslim riot. That they abducted a Hindu girl, and the rumor was spread that she was found in a Muslim area, and that the whole violence which was going on between the upper caste and the lower caste would turn towards Muslims, and the violence turned into a Hindu-Muslim violence. And then this became a pattern. We'll see a little bit now, and this has become the template, the RSS template for the rest of Cowbelt. Cowbelt is basically all of North and Western India. That how to counter caste mobilization through anti-Muslim violence by focusing on this Hindu identity. So then 1987 Meerut riots. Meerut is again a big business in India. It still is for sports goods. So all sorts of sports goods are manufactured in Meerut, have been manufactured for a long time. Again, the business competition between Banyas and Muslims. And there has been there was a very dastardly incident in Hashimpura. 40 Muslim youth were picked up during the riots from Hashimpura, which is an area in Meerut, and killed by a canal, and their bodies were dumped in the canal by 19 PAC men. PAC is the Provincial Armed Constabulary. It's like the National Guard. So it's state force, or more like a state police here. So that's the state police for Uttar Pradesh, the northern Indian state. Bhagalpur is again in Bihar. It is a little bit different phase now, because after the assertion of lower caste, the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, or the Ram Temple movement, it's kind of become stronger, and these kind of killings got to a new level altogether. And then we come to 1992, which is after the demolition, 1992, the Mughal mosque, Babri Mosque, was demolished by terrorists associated with the RSS on 6 December 1992, and the rioting broke out all over India. And this is just the case about Bombay. Close to 2,000 people died. 2/3 of them were Muslims in Bombay. Again, you can see rest of it. It's mostly the same. I mean, I just want to elaborate a little bit upon this 1993 Pangal, which is Manipur in northeast India. That was very interesting. So Pangal in Manipuri basically means Muslim, and the ethnic population of Manipur is called Meiteis. So Meiteis are all tribal people used to be. They have their own god called Sanamahi, and they follow Sanamahism. And slowly, under the influence of Brahminical missionaries and Islamic missionaries, some of them converted into Muslims, and some of them converted or started calling themselves Hindus. And what the state did, and the word for Muslim in Manipur is Pangals, so they were Meitei Pangals and Meitei Hindus. So what the state did to kind of totally exclude the Muslims, they slowly started calling Meitei Pangals only Pangals, and they started calling Meitei Hindus Meiteis. So obfuscation of religion in one case and obfuscation of ethnicity in one case. So they become Pangal versus Meiteis. From Meitei Pangal to Meitei Hindus, it become Muslims versus the Meiteis, the Manipuris. And now the whole Manipur politics is going around that. And yeah, that has been the situation. Gujarat program we already talked about. I think, you know, there was a bombing in Malegaon in Maharashtra. 40 Muslims died in a mosque. And Assam violence, Bodos and Bengalis. And then Delhi pogrom is the most recent one, 53, in a way to also quell the NRC CA protest, which I think Saeed referred to, and we'll talk more about. So this is kind of thing, I mean, we can take some of these issues, that how the character has changed and why it happens and how crucial the state support for religious violence. We can probably take it in question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So what I'll do now is I'll play snippets from the second part of the documentary, and then we'll have the next round of speakers talk about it.
ऐसा लग रहा है मुसलमान के नाम से मामला है।
Prior to Modi coming to power, there is intercommunal violence in India. Sometimes this involved lynchings of Muslims, of Hindus, of Sikhs. But definitely we can say that after 2014, there are increased numbers of lynchings towards the Muslim population.
Alimuddin's attackers accused him of trading beef, something that had been becoming increasingly controversial under Narendra Modi's rule. Hindus consider cows to be sacred.
Two Muslim women were beaten allegedly by members of a Hindu radical group.
Now this happened when the police received a tip-off that two women on a local train were bringing beef to sell in a large mob dragged 50-year-old Mohammed Akhlaq Sethi out of his home, killing him in front of his family with the equipment he uses for his
And it began with a speech that the Prime Minister made. After that, the violence began.
Over 3.5 years, vigilantes would kill 44 people and injure around 280 in cow-related violence. Most victims were Muslim. Few of the attackers were brought to justice. There were calls for Mr. Modi to condemn the violence, but he was largely silent.
His silence is heard by the people as appreciation. It is a clear signal that go ahead. Nothing will be done against you.
BJP spokesman Nityanand Mahato was found guilty of Alimuddin's murder and sentenced to life in prison. But one of Mr. Modi's government ministers helped him and the other convicted men with their legal fees. And when they were bailed, he welcomed them with garlands of flowers.
Today, people marched in Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, against what they see as a divisive law that discriminates against Muslim migrants. An unprecedented show of dissent against the country's Hindu nationalist leadership.
Protests have now escalated and it's across the country. It's now a pan-India agitation.
There have been violent protests in major cities across India, mostly in opposition to a new citizenship law, which many see as discriminating against the nation's large Muslim minority.
In Delhi, protesters occupied parts of the city and said they'd stay until the new law was repealed. Safura Zargar was among them.
पाँच जने को मार रहे थे और अपने फोन से वीडियो बनाकर मतलब अपने किसी को दिखा रहे थे कोई राइफल से मार रहा था कोई पाइप से वो डर था कैमरा लग रहा था मार देने क्योंकि वो बोल रहे थे राष्ट्रीय गान गाओ नृत्य राष्ट्रीय गान गा रहे
The video of Faizan's beating went viral. This Muslim man was beaten to death by the police. Faizan was 23. Safura Zargar remains on bail.
They have dehumanized Muslims in the country. It is being made very clear Muslims will have to live like second-class citizens.
Kismatun is still fighting to identify the police officers who beat her son to death.
तड़पती हूँ या कि इंसाफ ले बेटा मेरा बच्चा गरीब समझ के मार दिया मेरा बच्चा मुसलमान समझ के मार दिया क्या कर दिया बस यही दिन में सोचते हैं.
The men accused of attacking Alimuddin Ansari are still out on bail.
हमारा बच्चा लोग यतीम हो गया हमारा माँ सुना हो गया हमें इंसाफ चाहिए.
The West is looking at India as the best way to balance China. And that is the reason why they will not criticize, they will not condemn most of the decisions which have been made. Human rights are not very high on the list anymore because there is a bigger challenge.
It is important to the West, not only economically, but also politically. Any big conversation in international affairs, climate change, global finance, requires India to be in the room. There can be no solution without India. But it looks to be descending into some form of authoritarianism, where power is in the hands of one individual. I think with a high degree of certainty he'll win the next election, maybe he'll win the election after that. And that means for young people in India, that will be the only India they know.
Just a few points here. This video that you have seen, so this is all after Modi came to power. So that is all after 2014. Godra was when he was the chief minister, and then in 2014 he came to power. And all these incidents are after that. There was a talk about a person called Jayant Sinha who bailed out people who had lynched a man. Just a point of note here, Jayant Sinha has very strong ties to the state of Massachusetts. So I'll just leave it there. I'll invite Somnath to give his talk on the CA, NRC and Assam. And that will be followed by Upasna.
Yeah, I'll be brief actually. I mean, just to expand on what Saeed said, Jayant Sinha actually lives here. His family is here, his children are growing up here, while he goes around spreading this kind of violence on the children of the working, the oppressed people of India. And that is not he's not the only one in connection to India. Another minister, Anurag Thakur, who egged on the mob for the 2020 pogrom in Delhi, his son also studies in Boston. So all these upper caste people, oppressor caste people, who use the oppressed people of India as cannon fodder, have all their children studying in Oxford, Cambridge, and MIT, while putting the children of the working people into the fire. So I was going to briefly talk about the NRC, and Upasna will take on. NRC is the National Registry for Citizenship, which it has a long history. I'm not going to go into that. But in the recent times, it has been again used politically to bring up this Hindu-Muslim issue and keep it on the boil all the time. And then the NRC, when it was, they extended it. It started from Assam, and it was extended to India, all over India. And once that was done, 2 lakh people, which is 200,000 people, were left out, which means these people are not citizens of India. Rather, it was a way of creating stateless population. And in that, there were equal number of almost Hindus and Muslims. And to cover that up, then the government came up with the Citizenship Amendment Act, which gives a path for non-Muslim people to acquire citizenship, which again lifts the large Muslim population, stateless, basically. So, and the basis of that is these arbitrary boundaries, arbitrary national and international boundaries. What you see there in the red is the state of Assam, right? And that's what we are going to talk about. So going back to 1826 is when Assam was annexed by the British. And this is a very large part. You can see it. Assam was annexed as part of the Bengal Presidency, which covered all the way to Orissa, and you can see far west, all the way to the end of Assam. So that was the beginning of getting Assam into the and in 1874. What they did is they created a separate province called Chief Commissioner's Province, and Assam was taken away from the Bengal Presidency. So if you can in your mind think of these boundaries and do a time-lapse video, you see these boundaries moving like this, right? But people are not moving like this. People are living somewhere with their families, doing agriculture and whatnot. And in this time period, the British also started forceful displacement or forceful migration of people from the Bengal Delta into Assam to work in different tea gardens, this, that and the other, and also do agriculture on unlivable lands. And at the same time, they were also forcefully settling people in Sundarbans, which was also unlivable by humans. So a large population is actually moving within the province. There is no, there is no crossing of lines at that time. And then in 1905, as you know, the first partition of Bengal happens, and the one in dark red is the present day Bangladesh. And that has a big backlash from the people of India. So the British reverse it. So now again the boundary has shifted back and forth and back and forth. So how do you regard the population? Are they on this side or are they on this side? Does the line matter at all? So this is what is happening all along. And as you know, then finally the partition of Bengal happens. Partition of India, part of Bangladesh. Now is part of Bangladesh, at that time was part of Assam. So there is like a lot of arbitrariness going on, and this is the basis of NRC. Like completely flawed, right? So they are saying like people who have moved before 1971 have to show people. They will prove it so many, because Bangladesh has never said we are going to accept people from India. So what's going to happen to people who they are saying are not citizens of India? There is no clear path. Right? All the way from Assam to Delhi, of course you saw Shaheen Bagh, to Kolkata, to all major cities, women have been in the lead, and we are not necessarily activist women or anything. People who are running families, and these are the women who did sit-ins and led the movement. So it's a very, very important, I think, watershed in India's, India's people's resistance against the oppressive state forces. Upasana, you want to give more?
Maybe.
Yeah, as Upasana, I forgot to mention one point. Who bears the cost? I mean, I'm not talking about the human cost, just the money cost. These are the people themselves. It is people's money. So the numbers are something like that. 33 million people submitted close to 7 million documents, right? And some people had to walk days. some people had their children die in their 200,000 people left, which is about $200 million in a country where half the children still go to bed hungry. So this is people's money. This is how it is being used. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Upasana. I'm a doctoral student at University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I'm from Assam. I mean, the first thing I would like to share is that it feels like a tremendous responsibility when I'm talking about anything in the context of Northeast, because it's such a complicated history, and condensing it into 7 to 10 minutes of talk has not been easy, and I'm bound to leave out many aspects of this complicated trajectory. I'm hoping that we can take up some of these questions in the Q&A, but two things that I would like to stress in my overall picture of what is happening in the context of the Northeast is the fact that the state has really co-opted the indigenous cause and are using it now to target Muslims in the region. And at this point, because of the contentious political history, no well-meaning indigenous person can afford to not speak up against this appropriation. I'll start with that. NRC-CAA actually represents a very painful chapter in Assam's history. We now have a giant specter of a detention center in Gwalpara, Assam. And this detention center is not just being used to house people left out of the NRC process. It's being used in many different ways. For instance, just last month, a wave of arrests against child marriages in Assam has led to the criminalization of about 3,000 people, most of whom are actually Muslims of East Bengal origin, and a lot of them are now housed in these detention centers. Activists are already pointing out, how this criminalization actually disproportionately targets Muslims and also the tribal populations in the region. The tragedy is that many in Assam are already, speaking about having another CAA just to correct the inconsistencies in the last, when it should have by now been clear that this is not going to work, and from the very start, this process was actually set up to fail. What was actually a unique historical political context of Assam has been used by the state to extend it to entire country, and is now playing out with many of the same horrors. The state is both anti-indigenous and anti-Muslims. I repeat myself. For instance, in 2021, an activist from the indigenous missing community of Assam called Pranab Dulwe was denied a passport, citing that his citizenship was doubtful. So it's really clear that it's not just happening to Muslims, it's happening both to Muslims, indigenous, to the trans community, women at large. And this actually happened despite the fact that his name appeared on the NRC. So you can really see the arbitrary nature of how these decisions about criminalization and targeting really happen. This is really to highlight that there is a complete absence of the rule of law in the state. I would like to mention one more instance. During 1 year of Himanta Biswa Sarma, who's the chief minister of the BJP-ruled government in Assam, there have been 161 cases of police encounters and 51 killings. And this is both of indigenous and Muslim people. Some of his other legacies: demolition of madrasas, shutting down of 700 state-funded madrasas. And this had happened, the excuse was that these madrasas are actually tied to terrorist outfits. There have been beef bans, there have been lynchings, and criminalization of dissent under the UAPA, which is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. This is the order of the day in Assam today. But I want to talk a little bit about the political economy under which this victimization is taking place. This is important because it's not as simple as a Hindu-Muslim binary. The way that ethnic conflicts have played out in the region, it's located in struggles around land, struggles around identity, and insecurities that have been created by the legacies of colonialism. Some of that have been covered by Somnath, and I'm not going to elaborate a lot on that. But I would say that my own research in Nelly in 2019 has suggested that the state has actually continued to pit one community against the other. And these conflicts have happened around the insecurities related to land. In Assam, this fear about the illegal Bangladeshi encroacher actually really market, reserved lands and villages. And this is very clear in the situation in Nelly as elsewhere. Today, the right-wing forces in Assam have managed to communalize even the flood situation, and they're calling it flood jihad, in addition to, the love jihad. But I'm arguing that this is the thing that we need to pay attention to, the political economy of the floods that creates these vulnerabilities and rifts among communities. I would like to mention here a study done by the Uki Research Collective in Assam. These researchers found that Sipajhar, where the first wave of massive evictions in 2021 took place, had many migrants of Bengal origin Muslims move into the chars. The char, in my language, which is Assamese, it's called SORS. So I may alternate between using these terminologies. But the point here is that there is internal migration happening within Assam. And these SORs are actually temporary land masses, which change almost every year due to the flow of the Brahmaputra River. And this idea about the illegal migrant and the encroacher really misses the point that the nature of land ownership in the Brahmaputra Valley is actually shifting, and people migrate alongside. And both Muslims and indigenous communities are actually affected by these sorts of migration and these sorts of erosion and displacement that comes along with the river every year. Today, the Muslims in Sipajhar, from where they have been evicted, the indigenous missing community in Laika Doghia, the indigenous Moran community in Dibru Saikwa, and all these are actually reserved forests, the ones that have been arbitrarily demarcated. They are awaiting rehabilitation and live under the constant threat of evictions from one place to another in the name of conservation and development. And the fact of the matter is that these things are happening simultaneously with state appropriation of land. And I'll give you 3 instances here. Okay, I realize that I'm actually not moving with the slides. So maybe let me pause and change it. Yes. Yes, I think I've covered this. So 3 instances here. The Hingpatkai, which is a wildlife sanctuary in Assam. This wildlife sanctuary is actually so rich in biodiversity, it's known as the Amazon of the East. And this wildlife sanctuary was opened up for coal extraction in 2020 amidst widespread protests. Second, a 2021 investigation by the journal and magazine, The Wire and The Cross Current, established that a real estate company co-founded by Himanta Biswa Sarma's wife, Riniki Sarma Bhuya, is itself occupying 18 acres of government land. So you see this tension that, on the one hand, they're evicting people from the land, poor landless farmers, both of the indigenous and the Muslim migrant community, and on the other hand, they're also, continuing to give away these lands to crony capitalists, to their own families and business partners. And interestingly, this government land is actually sealing surplus land that was supposed to go to landless institutions or individuals. The third instance is from my own district, which is Nagaon. And this village is called Nikir Bamuni, where both indigenous Karbi and Adivasi communities reside. And here, the land was taken from these communities without due process or due compensation and given to Azure Power for a solar plant. So you realize again how these things are operating under the garb of, the language of development. Today, silencing dissenters who speak up. I'm just going to mention here how even, people who support BJP and are in the BJP in the Northeast are actually victims. In 2021, in Oting village in Nagaland, under the rule of the famous or the infamous AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Power Act, 6 Naga coal miners were killed by the armed paramilitary groups. And further protests against these killings actually led to even more killings, including of BJP members. This is to say that the lives of people in the region, including the indigenous and the migrants, are tied together. The politics of eviction and encounter killing, as we see in the course of the history of the Northeast, is now playing out elsewhere in mainland India, including in Haryana, where thousands of people were evicted. But my point is that these were actually perfected first in the frontier regions like Assam. And my contention here is that we just cannot stick to these binaries of legal, illegal, indigenous, migrant anymore. Of course, we have to recognize the complexities of the issue, but we also have to move beyond and realize, how the state is actually appropriating the land, how these struggles, ethnic conflicts or otherwise, are located in the political economy. And I mean, this is where the actual struggle really lies. I would not say that things are really hopeless, because just the other day, as Padma was very kind enough to share, we see that on February 24th or 25th, thousands of people from across community and ethnic lines, right? The Karbi, who I mentioned in the context of the Mikir Bamuni, the Bengal origin Muslims in the context of, say, Dholpur or in Sipachar, and the many other, Adivasi communities, the Assamese, the Bengali Hindu communities have come together to protest against this kind of dispossession. And I think the fact that this has even happened in this current political climate is a tremendous win. And I mean, this is a direction that we have to, I think, move forward in. Yeah, I mean, I think I would just, open it up for further question and answer, because it's not really, possible to cover the complex history. But I hope that I've given you at least some perspective on how these ethnic conflicts have actually played out. And I mean, the point here is that we really, really need to locate the role of the state in, furthering these conflicts. I'll end here.
Thank you, Upasana. I will now invite Pratyush to talk about crony capitalism.
Yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and thanks for the previous presenter. So I'm going to take actually a slightly different take on all of this, not a take, but different aspect of it, is that, so this is the news from 2022 that I'll start with. So this is a person who many of you know now, was the third richest man in the world. At that time, I think about $137 billion worth of, wealth. I mean, I know there are some people here who are much younger than I am, but how many of you heard of this fellow 20 years ago? Anybody? So this person was not known. I mean, hardly anybody, unless you followed the politics and capitalism in Gujarat, you would know of this person. But he was the third richest man for many months in the world, and this is obviously in the Forbes and also the Bloomberg list. And also was the richest Asian at that time, right? But that lasted up until January 24th. And on January 24th, there was this report that came out. How many of you have read the Hindenburg report? Anybody? Okay, many of you? Okay. Some of you, okay. Excellent. So, it's about 150 pages long. interesting read. But so this is a report that was released by something called in Wall Street called short sellers. And I'm not going to go into what short selling is and all that. We can have a fun discussion during Q&A about that. But so what they document is actually most of the things in this report were public information even before it came. Very well-known journalists in India had been documenting this for years. You know, Paranjoy Goa Thakurta had written a book. He has 6 cases against him for that. And there are many other journalists who were involved in this. You know, Wire they went after the Wire, they went after Newsclick, anybody who published a report on this, and they also documented that. So this is from the Hindenburg report. By the way, my sources are at the bottom in case somebody is interested. So if you look at the stocks, these are the key stocks of the Adani enterprises. So the Adanis so this is the 3rd richest man at that time on January 23rd. The largest firm is Adani Enterprises. For a 3-year stock gain is about 1,400%. Adani Total Gas, there is a 2,121% increase in their stock. This is, by the way, when all of you are wearing double masks and cooped up inside their homes, all locked up, right? So this is that period, 2020 to 2023. Adani Green Energy, 900%. Adani Power, 300%. So you get the drift, right? So their claim is, Hindenburg's claim is just on valuation, they are overvalued by 85%. Now, this is, I've deliberately kept it, unless you have binoculars, you can't see this, right? I've deliberately kept it like that because I don't want to go into all the parts of this Hindenburg report, but I just want to point out a couple of things, right? The group was about $218 billion, Adani Group, not just Gautam Adani. And some of the key claims. One is the listed companies, a lot of this was owned by these shell companies based in Mauritius, the Virgin Islands, and all these beautiful islands with a few thousand people and a lot of PO boxes, right? And probably a GDP of a few $1 billion, right? But that's where a lot of these, and it's controlled by largely the family key leaders. So that's another part is that several of the family members had been under investigation by the Indian Revenue Services for various kinds of fraud, for tax evasion, etc. And the reason was that they had been taking money out, bringing money back, all kinds of sophisticated things. And then we can sort of talk about some of that. So the UAE, the Mauritius, and several Caribbean islands were used. They downloaded 38 shell companies, they downloaded the entire stock of all the firms from Mauritius. And they found there were 38 shell companies directly affiliated to the Adanis, especially the older brother. The younger brother had been under Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, investigation for diamond trading, import-export schemes that were, what they were doing. There was, a lot of fraudulent activities, according to DRI, the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence. There were also a lot of other firms that were involved in this manipulation. So there was the way the holdings were, the way profits were increased. So the key thing is two key things. One is stock manipulation. The other is accounting fraud. That were the two key claims of the Hindenburg report. But but we won't go into all the details. It's a public report. So as you can see here, the day Adani, the Hindenburg report came out, the stock started falling. And it has fallen substantially. And it's largely because of these allegations that were noted on Wall Street, etc. And Adani, by the way, the stock is not one of the things that came out, is that the stock is largely traded by these entities, a substantial amount of it, these entities based in Mauritius and all that. Okay, so it fell by billions of dollars. I think the last, and I can't keep track of it, but the stock has fallen just a few days ago, about $135 billion from the total where it was. So, billion with a B, right? Okay, so let's go back. Why am I talking about this gentleman when we are talking about this document? In 2003, and all of you saw the documentary, another thing happened after the 2002 pogrom. Another thing happened. The Confederation of Indian Industry, which a lot of Indian big capitalists are part of and run, they were upset. And they said that this is not acceptable, or at least that's what they said publicly. They started withdrawing investments, etc. So then there was a rival group of Gujarati industrialists which was formed called Resurgent Gujarat Group. And it was largely led by two gentlemen. One was Adani, who I just mentioned, and the other is Mehta. And because of this, CII, which is a very, very powerful body of capitalists, was forced to apologize. What happened next? By 2013, so we're going, kind of 10 years later, and this is on the left is now the richest Indian, now called Ambani, Mukesh Ambani. And all these people on the dais are part of this Vibrant Gujarat 2013. So, and this is the 6th summit, and this is where who is investing in the state where the chief minister came from and the pogrom happened. So we see the shift and how that played out. Fast forward to 2014. This is after the election in 2014. The gentleman in the West waving is the Prime Minister, and the person you saw in the documentary on an Adani corporate jet, right? The same person who we talked about in the Hindenburg report. So fast forward another 10 years to 2023. Adani now, and this is kind of the start of the year, just a few weeks ago, owns about a dozen seaports in India, owns the largest private port in India called the Mundra port in Gujarat. And it has the highest container traffic. And he owns the second largest port in Israel, in Haifa, Israel. Is the largest operator, private operator of airports, the 6 large airports in India. Is the largest private operator of coal mines in India. And I'll continue further. Largest private generator of electricity from coal in India. Biggest transmitter of electricity that is produced in these plants. Largest producer of solar and wind energy in India. And the biggest private sector storage of grains, largely rice and wheat in India. So that's where all these firms that I listed earlier stand in 2023. How did we get here? from 2014 to 2023. So this is again, this is something, an investigation done by the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, the key auditing agency of the government, which found that during the period that the documentary covers and in the last 20 years, but mostly when Modi was Chief Minister, there were the irregularities to the tune of 25,000 crores. And just to give you a sense that 1 million, so 10 million is 1 crore, and $1 is around 82 rupees. So you can do the math, easy, right? But it's several billion dollars. Specifically, 1,500 crores was given to the Reliance Petroleum, SR Power, and the Adani Group. And this is not the Times of India. This is the Comptroller and Auditor General of India saying. Another thing, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but one other thing that I want to mention is that the largest importer of coal in India, the largest consumer of coal, because of was also listed as the ESG in S&P, Morgan Stanley Capital Index, etc. And all of that, when all of that was uncovered, that's gone under review. And what many of you might know that once you're taken out of the index, that means the automatic pension funds and all that go into that, put money into the index to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. That doesn't happen. Another part, and that sort of relates to what Upasana and Somnath mentioned also about the relationship of CAA, Bangladesh, and all that. So I just want to bring in one of the things, so this is the power plant. This is Godda power plant in Jharkhand, India. It gets coal from the mines that Adani owns, but also mines that Adani owns in Australia, Indonesia. The Carmichael mine in Australia, by the way, is where indigenous people of Australia have been, living. And Jharkhand, major sections are the Adivasis. So this power plant gets coal from there, produces power, takes power from Jharkhand, supplies it to Bangladesh. Bangladesh is forced to buy, even if they don't get 1 megawatt of power, they have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. For all of you who know, coal is the worst form of production of energy, right, in terms of the carbon footprint. So the 1 billion cess for clean energy cess, Adani will not be paying. This is such a sweetheart deal. They will have exemption on excise duty, service tax, CST, value-added tax, and the people of Bangladesh end up paying for this 25-year deal for the import of power. So they will be charged $450 million a year, even if they do not import an iota of power. So that's the deal with them. So then who's paying for this? I mean, there was international investors, but the way the Indian banking system is, part of it is nationalized, which is owned by the taxpayers, and one major firm is the Life Insurance Company of India, Life Insurance Corporation of India. They are one of the major investors in the Adani Group, and that has increased recently in the last several years. Because of that exposure, they have lost thousands of crores, and since the LIC IPO, their stock has fallen. So poor people who had put in stock in the Life Insurance Corporation of India were exposed to the Adani Corporation. Now, with all this, after the Hindenburg report, what is going on is the lot of damage control. So, former Prime Minister of Australia has just gone on record a couple of days ago saying that he has a lot of respect for this businessman for all that he's done. A couple of days ago, there was a major investment in Adani. So, by this group, GQG Partners, which is owned by Rajiv Jain, listed in Australia. And one of the problems, and I'll sort of end with the Adani saga here, but one of the problems is that they have a lot of debt. So a lot of these acquisitions are done by taking loans, LIC, SBI, but then also a lot of international loans, dollar loans, right? And they times to pay back because there have been margin calls, and we can talk about margin calls later on, but so that's one of the problems. Now, in closing, there was this, just a few weeks ago, there was this UP Global Investors Summit in the largest state with the largest number of Lok Sabha parliament seats in India. And Mr. Adani was missing from that. But then other folks have come in to chip in and do the part that they're doing. So the two key gentlemen sitting in front, one is Ambani, the other is Birla, one of the largest capitalists. The two folks on the left, one is the Prime Minister, the other is the Chief Minister of UP. The reason I bring that up is connecting the dots in terms of this pogrom, who is funding a lot of this investor summits, bringing into vibrant Gujarat, connecting with that. Because the last election in India was the most expensive election in the entire world of any country. It's more expensive than the US, more expensive than any other country. It cost $8.6 billion. And India also has one of the largest people who don't have enough to eat. It also has the largest number of poor people in the world. But we spent, the rich spent about $8.6 billion funding the election. So you can all connect the dots. So finally, I don't want to end with a pessimistic note because actually there are a lot of things going on where people are actually fighting back. And so these are the indigenous people in Australia who are fighting against the carbon mines in Australia. There are workers, actually the banking workers who have released the non-performing assets, which are the loans that are taken by the government-owned banks and that have not been paid back. They have released those names, and a lot of these folks figure in that. So they are also doing their part. They're holding various strikes, etc. And they're sort of raising people's issues, bringing it to that front. This is in rural areas where lands for mining is being taken over, whether it's indigenous people, the agricultural laborers, who are a large sections are Dalits. They're saying, like for example, Adani go back, there's a sign in Hindi called Jaan denge, zameen nahi. We will give our lives, but not the land. So they're fighting back. The farmers movement, which was one of the largest movements in the history of humankind, they have raised major issues about this nexus, because I just mentioned the largest private operator of storage of grains, which was related to the 3 farm laws, is Gautam Adani, and that's where the grains, the rice and the wheat goes. So women, agricultural workers, farmers played a major role in that. Shaheen Bagh, which Arif and Somnath and Upasana mentioned, this was a major resistance against the anti-CAA NRC. So women are taking a major role in fighting that. So for example, at the bottom it says, "Abhi to li angadai hai, aage aur ladai hai," which means we have just started and we are here for the long haul. And then, the RSS and BHP and BJP have also been involved in major caste atrocities in India. And this is from one of them, and I don't want to mention, because there are so much resistance. And this was in Una, in Gujarat, right where the pogrom took place. And people are fighting back. Like for example, this placard on the left talks about, we are not going to tolerate any caste atrocities, and this militant woman next to Ambedkar's picture says, "Khub dabe hain, ab na dabenge." We have been oppressed, no more oppression. Khub sahe hain, ab na sahenge. We have tolerated enough, enough is enough. So with that, I'll end there. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Pratyush. So we can now open it up to Q&A and discussion. So feel free to raise your hands. If anybody needs like paper or pen to write something, to write questions, you can do that too. I can provide it. Just raise your hand and any of the speakers can take your questions based on what they've spoken about. Yeah, question in the back, please.
Yeah, I think the second speaker maybe. You mentioned about the nexus, right? Like the nexus of the whose son are here, whose daughter is studying here. After all the privilege of operation, they continue on the Dalit Adivasi, the marginalized Muslim community, or any kind of operation, and then the leaders' sons are here. And the same nexus also goes into the back, right? Like the people who are here. In January 13th, I was in Hyderabad, in a media house, and then this person who was here almost like 20-30 years here in Texas, he now joined BJP in Telangana, and then his sons are here, they're citizens here, and then the wife is here. He have a business here, he have a business there, and then he's doing a government program. Mission Kakatiya program is monitoring the water, I don't know what you call it, but anyways. So the nexus, who are these people also coming out, right? Like these people come with a certain class privilege, and then their class, again, as the crony capital, and then all these matches. So they want, their kids are saying, their families are saying, who are they going in and saying Jai Sri Ram, which is irrelevant to Telangana, at least like where I come from, people can tell. It is majority is Dalit Adivasi and then other Bhajan population, and there is no Vedic the culture at all in Telangana. Adding to basically, I'm trying to add to your point, and then we have to also acknowledge that which caste these communities also coming, right? Who are perpetuating the hate crimes in India is these communities who are dominant in nature in all these states. So I also created the chapter which looks into the post-Telangana, how the rampant radical Hinduization is happening under the iceberg of the radical Hindutva state, like even the governments, the smaller governments, which may not be, their ideology may not be Hindutva, but then the policies, certain policies they bring which actually glorifies the Hindutva state. And one particular, like Telangana case if I take, the government started Vaikunta Dhamam, the common crematoriums for the state party. And in rural areas for all 12,721 gram panchayats, what they started is like saying that Vaikunta Dhamam, which doesn't make sense to the Adivasi population where I come from. Being an Adivasi, it doesn't make any sense to me or my family that these crematoriums are not utilized. So every sense how the state itself works is like very Brahminical and then very upper caste in nature, right? Like the understanding is the majoritarian state in any part of the world works such a way. So it's very clear distinction we have to make in whenever we may be talking here or abroad or wherever in academic spaces or like.
Absolutely. I mean, there is no doubt that the state in India is a Brahminical state, right? As the nature of the state in the United States is a white supremacist of structure, and the majority of the people who have migrated to this country from India also come with this caste privilege, and that is the major reason why they were able to migrate and then consolidate. And now you can even see the coming together of this Brahminical supremacist structure and white supremacist structure, right? We are seeing this all over in Texas and all where the Brahminical forces are sort of embracing this police kind of a treat, right? So this is the affinity that these supremacist structures have, and there is no doubt about it that it is the same people, and then the people here are also largely the people who are funding these operations of hate operations in India, and the kind of vitriolic and to cut the long story short, to basically create this false division of Hindu, Muslim to sort of protect the Brahminical rule, which is like the top 3% of the division. So yeah, your point is very well appreciated.
Just one addition, like the rule in India is not majoritarian. I wish it was. It's an extreme minority because it's a very tiny minority of the Indian population which controls the state, controls the institution, and the Brahminical ideology, their ideology, which is they're enforcing everybody else under this garb of a Hindu-Muslim binary. We need to be careful.
It also, of course, adds into the larger neoliberal policy. We shouldn't be, of course, denying the complete class levels of the Indian state, the Indian people.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a sort of a legal, larger conceptual question, rather. So, like when existing laws, and we often see like the state is able to give an excuse of existing law to justify its position, maybe on like bulldozer politics that we saw, like the beef lynching we saw. So in each particular instance, or even like the sedition laws that the state has been imposing on people, so every time we have existing statutes which the state is selectively able to use, and being a citizen, what I find very difficult is like how to contest these positions, because the state is always able to defend, okay, this was an illegal construction, or this guy was trading in material which is banned by the state, or similarly in other instances. So how do we pose resistance in a system where laws are itself like colonial on one instance, and then there is like big discretionary scope of bureaucratic misuse, which is also done in Indian state context. So in all those situations combined, when the laws itself are unjust to an extent or outdated to an extent, and can be used bureaucratically to wrong ends, how do you build up a resistance, organized resistance at least, against the state, which is like hell-bent on targeting minorities?
So, others can also respond. I'll just give a short, Pratyush and Upasana, we also respond. But in short, I would just say, the two largest burning examples in front of our eyes are the farmers' struggle and the NPCA. People just said, we don't care what the law is, the legitimacy of state power, and can it be and should it be challenged? And he says in many cases state acts criminally, and then it is upon the citizens to resist that. So there are various levels, and legal, taking on legal, going to court could be one way, but that cannot be the only way. And farmer struggle has shown that people have force them to reverse the laws. And the CAA struggle has shown people's power has forced them to so it's like a ground up resistance, and the resistance primarily centered around oppressed people. Struggles cannot be waged by only privileged people's leadership, right? So that's a very important, so Adivasis, Dalit, Bahujan people, all the trans people, or the marginalized sections of India, which constitutes what Arif was saying, the majority of people. They have to be at the center, they have to be at the helm of the struggles, and privileged people can give the solidarity, but not.
Just quickly, we also need to keep in mind, we love to diss on the colonial structure and the institutions of the Indian state. But beyond that, we also need to understand that this is a problem of democracy. This is a democratic problem, in the sense that what does it mean, like, for example, 317 in Kashmir. Whatever the Modi government did is as